Welcome to Game Changers with Molly Fletcher, where we take you behind the scenes with peak performers to learn what makes them tick and discover how you can apply their lessons to your life. I'm your host, Molly Fletcher. At age 9, John O'Leary suffered burns to 100% of his body after a gasoline explosion in his family home. He was given a 1% chance to live. John not only survived, he made it his life's mission to inspire others. But it took him years to embrace the power of his story, which he shares in his book, On Fire, and in his keynotes to audiences around the world. In our conversation, John shares the lessons he learned through his experience and the everyday heroes who stepped into his life to help him on his journey. We talk about how to overcome adversity, the power in owning your story, and how to defeat toxic thinking. Here's my conversation with John O'Leary. John O'Leary, what an absolute pleasure to have you on. You are an inspiration to so many. We've had a chance to share the stage before, and I was honored to meet you. So thanks for joining me.
Well, Molly, the inspiration and honor is mine because I saw you speak. I've read your books. I've listened to the podcast, and I'm thrilled to be on it now today myself. So thank you for having me on.
Oh, you're kind. So let's dig right in. Take me back to the day of the accident, and what do you remember about that day?
You know, a lot of folks, they ask that question really not knowing that the story is mine. And so what happened to me happened at age 9, and I think their preconceived notion is it's probably what his parents have told him or the doctors have told him or what he read about it. And the reality, Molly, is there are moments in your life that are so profoundly powerful you'll never forget it. And some of them are positive and others are very negative. And for me, one of the moments in my life that is unforgettable was at age 9, walking to my mother and father's garage with a piece of paper burning in my right hand. I made my way over to a can of gasoline, bent down next to it, and the plan at age 9, with the genius level of creativity of a child, was to see what might happen if I poured a little gasoline on top of this piece of paper that is burning. And of course, what happened was this massive explosion that split the can in two. It blasted me 20 feet against the far side of the garage, set my world on fire, covered me in flames. The entire garage was aflame. And, when we're little, we're all taught what to do when we're on fire. And of course, it's stop, drop, and roll. And that's easy to say in class, but it's much harder to do in life when you're the one on fire. And I remember running on fire through the flames, coming into my mom and dad's house. They're gone. So I ran through the kitchen and the family room. Molly, I made it all the way into the front of the house, stood burning on top of this rug, just screaming and praying for a hero. Like, God, I'll take anybody. I'll take anybody. And I see my brother Jim, who was 17. And, he's my older brother. He seldom had been nice to me before this day. So I remember as he's racing toward me, I'm thinking, God, anybody else, not this dude, not him. I need a real hero. And yet, Miles, that this was his day to change. And he picked up a rug, he beat down the flames, took him 3 minutes, carried me outside. And the lifesaver of the year for the state of Missouri in 1987 was a 17-year-old, pimple-faced, freckle-faced jerk brother named Jim O'Leary, who changed and has remained so subsequently. So that's the Cliff Note version of the starting point of this story that began on January 17th.
And then you went to the hospital, of course, and I found this really remarkable, what your mom did. Sort of tell us what happened when you got to the hospital and your mom came to your side. Tell our listeners that story. It's so powerful.
Well, and, for those of us who are mothers or fathers or aunties or uncles, or if you've ever loved anything or anybody more than yourself, I think you can relate to this story, and hopefully that is all of your listeners. My mother walks in, and she sees in front of her this little child she'd left an hour earlier. It's a reminder of how quickly life happened. This little boy she left playing in the front hall is now laying in front of her with burns on 100% of his body. dying. So that's a pretty radical image to see as a parent. She walks in, she takes my hand, she tells me she loves me. And I remember looking up at my mother and saying, Mom, knock it off with the love. Just knock it off. Am I going to die? Am I going to die? And Molly, when I asked her that question, I assumed she was going to say, baby, you're fine. We'll get you out of here today. We'll swing you through a Steak and Shake on the way home. We'll get you a milkshake. I thought she would provide the milkshake promise, but instead, like all great coaches or leaders do, my mother gave me truth. And she took my hands more firmly in hers. She patted my bald head. She looked me in the eyes and she says, baby, look at me. Do you want to die? It's your choice. It's not mine. Wow. And I looked back at my mother like stunned, like you lost my breath, like you just lost yours. And I said, Mom, no, I don't want to die. I want to live. And her response was, good. Then look at me. You, John, you take the hand of God. You walk the journey with him and you fight like you have never fought before. She said, Dad and I will be with you every step along the way, but you've got to choose this thing. You've got to want this thing. You've got to fight. And Molly, on January 17th, 1987, I had no idea what tomorrow had in store. Mm-hmm. Like I'd never heard of amputations or skin grafts or therapy. I'd never heard of any of this burn care stuff. But what we knew on day one, and I think this is true for all of us on this day, which is day one for you, listeners and leaders, like the fight was on. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes that's enough. The fight was on. We were committed to that.
Well, you were committed, no question. And it's an amazing, what your mom did in that moment. I mean, my husband and I have 3 daughters, and I feel like I'm a pretty strong mom, but wow. To me, that was a remarkable reaction from a human being in that moment to somebody that she loves more than anything in the world. I know as a parent, so that's remarkable.
Frequently in parenting or coaching or sales leadership or whatever the role is, we think being kind and doing something for someone else will save them. If I help this person, or if I drive her there, or if I do this thing for them, then they'll be better. And sometimes that's exactly what they need. Truly, they need that assistance. They need that guidance. They need that help. They need love. But other times, love demands that we be bold, that we demand accountability, and ultimately, we recognize that we can't choose someone else's next step for them. You can carry them, you can push them, you can prod them, but at the end of the day in life, they've got to choose to put the left foot in front of the right at some point. And my mother is Exhibit A at teaching others on exactly how to do this. And she did it for me the first day I was burned. She's done it for me for my entire life. I don't think that means that she's cold-hearted. I actually think it means she's one of the most loving, charismatic, generous, encouragers I've ever bumped into. She's just remarkable, and I cannot believe I get to call her mom.
And so you listen to this, you look up, you commit to living with what I have read to be a 1% chance of survival. Walk me through what happened next, both mentally and physically, with the doctors and nurses. What did that look like? And how did you said it, which is obviously one thing in life, but it's a whole other thing to do it. And you've done it.
The word we, it's one I use frequently because we have done it. And I'm not that impressive as a guy. Hang out with me a little bit longer, you'll see that firsthand. But what we did in that hospital is just unbelievable. So yes, my mother came in, my father came in with love. The doctors and nurses came in, and one of the very first thing they did is they tied me down to the bed. Arms and legs tied down, which meant for 5 months I could not move anything physically. And they do that so you don't contract into the fetal position. But that's a difficult physical position to find yourself for 5 months of recovery.
Oh my
the other thing
right.
They were forced to do going forward is skin grafts. And when you're burned on 100% of your body and 87% of third degree, the only place that can draw skin from, in my case, is my scalp. That's the part of my body really unaffected by the burns, unbelievably. So my face and my scalp were unaffected. So 13 different times it came back to my scalp. So that's a difficult procedure to endure as a kid, and they're putting you through daily bandage changes and physical therapy. And in the early stages, I could not even see. My body doubled in size overnight. So I spent the first couple months in total darkness, Molly. So physically, it's an uphill battle. But to be honest with you, the much harder story in some regards, and I think the one that connects with the listeners much more so, is the emotional story. It's unlikely that you'll be tied down to a bed for 5 months or that you'll lose your fingers to amputation or go through skin grafts. But all of us are going to have bad days, and all of us are going to feel pain that we wish would go away, and all of us are going to be stuck in situations we wish we weren't currently in. And so that was a situation I found myself in for 5 months in recovery, but candidly, for 32 years since, life is not always easy for me and not always perfect for me. And so choosing joy and choosing gratitude and choosing to see the blessings for what they are on a moment-by-moment basis, whether you're at age 9 recovering from burns or you're at age 42 trying to get 4 kids out of the house and run your business and say yes to podcasts and deal with some things physically and say yes to life. That's still a great challenge and a great opportunity that I think all of us face.
Mm-hmm. No question. And there were people in the hospital that impacted you. And tell me a story about the way they did that, how they did that, and how it impacted you long term.
Well, it's a great question with a long answer. So I'll give it the briefest one I can think of.
Okay.
We received boxes of letters from around the country beginning that first week that my mom and dad would just come in, they'd garb up and they would read me what other school-age kids were saying about me or what teachers around the country were praying for us. Shortly into recovery, we got a letter from a guy named Ronald and his wife, Nancy, out of Washington, D.C. This is back in 1987. So those two had something else going on called the White House, but they weren't too busy to serve. We got a letter from a guy who wore a little white hat called Pope John Paul II, pastors from around the country, rabbis in Israel were planting trees on our behalf. It became like this global ministry that people were getting behind. This little middle-class boy from the middle part of the United States, and there was just something about it that people felt called to say, gosh, we just want to do something for them, which matters when you're struggling for all of us. But to know that I was not in this thing alone was huge. The medical staff, and we could spend a lot of time talking about what they did, they were unbelievable. The doctor and the janitor and the nurses and the techs and the therapists and the chaplains, the social workers. But maybe my favorite story was a volunteer who came in from outside of the hospital. When I was first recovering, I was tied down, could not see, but I could hear. And the day after I was burned, I'm laying in total darkness, can't do anything, but I hear my door open up. I hear footsteps walk in. I hear somebody pull a chair across the floor. I hear them cough. And then I hear the voice of the legendary Hall of Fame Cardinal announcer. His name was Jack Buck. So for your listeners, you may not know the name Jack Buck, but his son Joe calls a few baseball games and a few Super Bowl games from time to time. So Joe's a celebrity. And I love Joe, but I loved his father. And I never met the guy. But I listened to him every single night as a little Midwest Missouri boy growing up a Cardinal fan. Jack Buck was my childhood icon. He was my hero. And now here it is, a day into recovery, this man has come into my darkness to whisper some encouragement. And what he said on that first day was, kid, wake up. Wake up. You are going to live. You are going to survive. Keep fighting. John O'Leary Day at the ballpark will make it all worthwhile. And then he says, keep fighting. Wow. And my one visit with Jack Buck ends with him walking out 9 seconds after he walks in. I'm tied down. My eyes are swollen shut. I'm physically in pain. And I am on fire for life. The dude
awesome.
came in one time, like listeners, you think your 9 seconds don't matter, like listen up. He came in one time for 9 seconds and he changed me forever. I'll never forget that visit. And then I learned years later from my dad that he walked down the hallway, like 3 doors, leaned his head against a glass door, and this is a fully grown man, and he just started weeping. Wow. He just started weeping in the hallway. One of the nurses explains that the little boy is going to die. There's no reason for hope. And then the following day, this guy who doesn't know me before he met me the day before comes back into my room, back into my darkness, back into this deathbed, if you will, sits with me a second time and says, kid, wake up. You are going to live. You are going to survive. Keep fighting. John O'Leary Day at the ballpark will make it all worthwhile. And Molly, he kept that encouragement, kept that promise, kept that light in front of me during a very dark time during the 5 months I was in the hospital. And you asked earlier, like, how'd you get through that physical pain and the mental pain? Faith and grit and resiliency and, just determination and having goals. All that stuff matters. But we got through that time, and we had an awful lot of people pouring in, and we were blessed to have Jack Buck, this Hall of Fame announcer for the St. Louis Cardinals, as one more ambassador for this little boy's mission.
God, and was there John O'Leary Day at the ballpark? I have to ask.
So it's ironic because I can't tell you how frequently when I speak publicly, people come up afterwards
and want to know.
They were there. They were either at the game or they heard it on the radio.
Oh, cool.
And so we had, on August 26, 1987, John O'Leary Day at the ballpark. It was against the New York Mets. He picked me up in a Lincoln Town Car, takes me downtown, introduces me to the team. I've got this goofy grin on my face the entire time from my wheelchair. He rolls me around the clubhouse, takes me upstairs. We broadcast the ball game together. And
so cool.
There are some experiences in life now you'll never, ever forget. You've certainly had your share. For me, being seated next to the Hall of Famer himself, Jack Buck, while we are broadcasting the St. Louis Cardinals, man, that there are moments that allow you to take the next difficult step forward. And for a little guy, yes, I was home from hospital, and yes, I was not going to die anymore. But there was no guarantee I was going to live. We can spend some time unpacking that one. But there was no guarantee at all I was going to have any real life in front of me. And I think visits like that and meeting your heroes and being loved and being respected and being cherished as having value, I get goosebumps thinking about it. He changed the arc of my life.
Amazing, man. Wow. That is such a cool story because, I remember you and I talking and you telling folks that, because you were going to be like a middle infielder for the Cardinals, right? Making a couple $1 million a year, crushing it, hitting like 300, right? Don't I recall that?
Yes, that's right. And that was part of the plan.
Yeah.
And then the plan changes, as every one of your listeners know.
Absolutely. Well, all of our lives do. Let me ask you this. For years, I know you wanted to be normal, and you talk about that, and you sort of described that you were living behind a mask. What were some of the ways that you were masking your reality? How did you get clear on the fact that you were, and then make a shift to not live that way anymore because you don't live with a mask on anymore?
Awesome. So I after listening to a bunch of your podcasts and reading a bunch of your work and listening to your TED Talk and everything else, I think most of the people who really receive your message want to live extraordinary lives. Like we want to up our game. We want to be the best athlete, coach, parent, daughter, servant, whatever the title is. That doesn't matter as much as striving toward excellence. And when you're burned at age 9 and you're radically changed physically, I can't speak for everybody else, but what I was striving for was not excellence. It was normalcy, and it was acceptance from others primarily, not even of myself, but being accepted by those around me, which is an odd thing to strive toward in life, unless you're so radically different than everybody else. And then I think it starts to make a little bit of sense. So when I came home from the hospital, man, my great dream wasn't to have a podcast or write a book or speak. It was to be ordinary, which is an odd goal, but that was my dream. And for me, in the early stage, it was maybe to feed myself and maybe to dress myself and then maybe to play a little bit of soccer again and shoot the basketball underhand on my knuckles and go out with my buddies, learn how to ride a bike without hands, or learn how to water ski without hands, and do all these really kind of radical stuff, but not be doing it to do something cool, but instead to be doing it so that others would not see my scars or see my weaknesses or see my brokenness, but only see me. That was my great dream. And as I aged, part of that manifested as I started to try to fit in. And how do you fit in if you can't do anything really well? Start drinking. So I drank more than anybody else for probably a decade of my life. And it was a badge of honor because it was something I could do well. It made me feel comfortable publicly, and people celebrated the fact that, hey, at least this kid can do one thing really, really, really well. And I don't brag on it today. I think it's just part of the story that's led me forward to where I am today. But that was part of wearing the mask, is wearing one that wasn't really me. And it eventually changed, Molly, when my mom and dad wrote a book about 15 years ago. So somewhat recently, in fact, called Overwhelming Odds. And my dad and my mom wrote a little book about their story of their son getting burns and what we as a family went through, how God shows up, how the community shows up, what it taught us, and what it might mean for others in the marketplace. So for the first time in my entire life, I've come face to face with my story, this thing I've always run from, always. I never, I dated. I never told anybody what happened. I never told people during job interviews what happened. I ran my own business, construction. Like, what's the worst job in the world for a guy without fingers to do? Construction's probably pretty high on the list.
Right.
And that's what I did for almost a decade of my life because I wanted to prove to the world I was normal.
Wow.
And then my mom and dad, through the written word, reminded me how abnormal I am. And I was worried that that was a negative. But as I read their words, I recognized, far from being negative, it's this grand positive. That it was a story I wouldn't have wished upon my worst enemy. Like the things we went through, burn care is unbelievably difficult to endure. And yet it led us perfectly to a place of compassion and faithfulness and grit and resiliency. And it led to our network. It led to where I went to college eventually, which led to a chance encounter with a little brunette named Elizabeth Grace, which in time led to her saying, "I do on an altar," which in time would lead to 4 little ones in our life. So the very best of my life is the result of also the very worst of my life. And these two things came together perfectly. And instead of seeing the positive, I was focused for the most part of my life on the negative, on what I did not have rather than what I did.
Mm-hmm. And the way that you have now leaned into this and used this as such a remarkable gift to serve and support and give and strengthen so many other people is remarkable. I mean, you took something so very difficult and have turned it into a remarkable gift. It's something I think so many of us, I know I do, and our listeners admire. So it's remarkable. Congratulations on what you've overcome, John. It's incredible. I know you must hear that all the time.
And I really appreciate that, whether it's coming from you or anybody else. It means a lot. But I think for those who've either read my story or know the story or have heard me speak, recognize the fact that John O'Leary didn't do a whole lot of that. I endured in a hospital bed, and outside of that, I have been well served, well loved, a lot of grace, and the ability. And this is something my mother taught me. There's a lot of lessons she gave me, but one is saying yes to the next difficult thing in front of you, and that's really hard. I think we recognize like the grand possibilities of our life. The question is, will you say yes to it? Will you say yes to it? Mm-hmm. And maybe a story that your listeners might enjoy. Like, I came home from the hospital on a Saturday afternoon. Like, boom, baby, we made it. Against overwhelming odds, this little boy and his family come home to a rebuilt house. Victory. But what you recognize that first day is like, that's only the first day. Now you got to turn the page, right. And Sunday morning's going to come around. And when are you going to learn how to walk again? When are you going to learn how to use your hands, what remain of them again? Mm-hmm. How are you going to live again? Mm-hmm. And so my mother's the one that taught me how to say yes to that. I'm at home on a Tuesday morning. The doorbell rings, and it's Mrs. Bartello. She's our piano teacher. My siblings are all in school. I'm on a morphine drip. I'm in a wheelchair. I have no fingers, and I'm in an airplane splint, which means my left arm is out at 90 degrees. Okay? Mm-hmm. So I know this woman's not there for me. Because I hated piano before I got burned, and I hate it even more now that I've been burned. I know she's not there for me, but I can't figure out why she's in the house. And then my mother comes into the kitchen. I look up and I say, "Mom, why is she here?" And my mom doesn't say a word. And there's a lesson here somewhere. She doesn't speak a word. Instead, this wonderful woman quietly walks into the room, unhooks the brakes of my wheelchair. And we could play on that one for an hour podcast.
Right.
She unhooks the brakes of my wheelchair. We all have brakes on our wheelchairs, whether you're seated in one today or not. I don't really care. My mother saw one of the brakes of my life. She liberated me from it, rolls me away from the kitchen table down a hallway to a living room. At a piano, she sits me, locks the brakes, walks out, and never said a word to me that day. And now I'm seated next to Mrs. Bartello. My left arm is up at 90 degrees. There's a morphine drip into my right shoulder. My right hand is in a boxing glove. And a little boy is about to take piano class with no fingers.
That's incredible.
Like, I hate my mom.
Right,
I hate my mom.
Sure.
And the only time I think I hated her more was the following Tuesday when Mrs. Bartello came back. And the following Tuesday. And for 5 years, slowly, as they pulled off these bandages and freed me of that airplane sprint and pulled out that needle drip of morphine and liberated me to use a finger or then 2 fingers and then 3 fingers at a time, eventually to be able to play music again. The lesson she taught me wasn't how do you play chopsticks.
Right.
The lesson she taught me was how you say yes to life in its grandeur and in its pain, in its struggles and in its redemptive nature. And that's a lesson that has been carried forward from the wheelchair into grade school, high school, college, and subsequently. Saying yes to life is hard, but when you just say yes to the next best thing, it's kind of easy. Like
once you do a little bit of it, it gets a little... And you're also saying say yes to life, but you're saying say yes to adversity, say yes to challenges, right?
Well, in life, don't be confused. No, life is only sunsets in Naples, Florida from the Ritz-Carlton balcony. Far from it, people.
Right.
It involves cancer diagnosis and grade school carpool lines and disappointments and bankruptcies and massive struggles relationally and things that you wouldn't wish upon your worst enemies. Like, that's all part of it. But being able and free to say yes to the good and the bad allows you and liberates you to fully embrace the gift that is your life and the freedom to do something even bigger today than you did yesterday.
And so, John, what do you tactically do to do that? Like, tell me a little bit about what's going on in your head and in your heart that allows you to, your mom sort of quote unquote made you do that in that moment. There's lots of moments that have happened along your life where you had to do it yourself.
Right.
How do you do that tactically? And what advice do you have for folks that are listening on how to lean into adversity?
Part of it is just with perspective. I would invite you all to think about what is the likelihood that you are listening to this podcast? And I don't mean like, well, I almost decided not to, but now I am. No, like, what is the likelihood of you being born? And once you start to understand the radical miracle that is your breath, your mother and father happened to hear Marvin Gaye at just the right time, baby. And because of that moment, I'm serious. Like, you should not be here. Your mother has 200,000 eggs. One of them had you part of it. One. And don't even get me going on your dad, okay? This is not likely business that we're in this room listening to your podcast today, Molly Fletcher. So our life is a miracle. Maybe you want to act like it. So once you start seeing life through the grandeur that it is, then you can start saying, okay, so what do we do daily to step into the gift that it is? Not the ease that it is. It is not. It's not easy, but it's good, and the foundation is firm. So here's my daily ritual. Every morning I wake up earlier than anybody else. I would make myself a coffee. I go outside, even if it's cold, and I watch the sunrise. I think it's the most epic part of any day, and the vast majority of us either miss it because we slept in or we curse it. You pull down the visor, you grab your sunshades, and you're like, I can't even see the road, darn it. And we're missing what is directly in front of us. The whole world is dark, and then it fades, and the red glimmer of hope starts to pop, and then it gets orange, and then yellow and bright, and it fills the world with light. So while that thing happens in front of me every day, I say, why me? Like, God, why me? Why am I here? What are the gifts that I can tap into today? What did I learn from yesterday? And as I stretch that gratitude muscle, every single day I find I have more to write about. Like, I'm the most fortunate guy I know. And for those who've seen me physically, I have scars from my neck to my toes. And it would be very easy to be a victim to my circumstances. But I choose joy. And you don't have to. You can choose misery and monotony. Have at it. The world will choose that with you. More at 10 o'clock tonight. They'll tell you how bad everything is. But I choose to see how good things are. And then to go from that point. So why me is my first question. Throughout the day, I say, who cares? If it's hard, if it's uphill, if I'm doing more with less, if some things are more difficult because I'm missing my fingers on 2 hands, who cares? I have life in my lungs. I'm grateful for that opportunity. Who cares? In time will inform us of what our mission is. I know you're a big mission person. You're a big why person.
Sure.
Well, Molly, my why, the reason I choose to thrive is because God demands it, my family deserves it, and the world is starved for it. That's why I get up early and watch the sunrise. That's why I take inventory of what I have, not what I don't have. That's why I do things even if it's difficult professionally or personally. I'm very convicted on my why. It's very clear to me. It also allows me, I think, to rebound quicker from challenges, which I know you know an awful lot about. So I know my why, and I would encourage your listeners, if they don't, keep asking yourself, who cares? and answer it with the statement, I choose to thrive, or I choose to rebound because. That will get you pretty clear in your why. And then the third question, this is the one I learned from Jack Buck, who lived a Hall of Fame life, was the question he asked nightly, what more can I do to make tomorrow better than today? And that's a process, a question I've been asking every night of my life for 7 years. And it has led to some unbelievable things in my business, in my faith journey, as a son to my parents, as a husband to my wife, as a father to my 4 babies, as a guy who's trying to make a difference for little kids who've been burned or dealing with cancer, or saying yes to the Molly Fletcher podcast when you got a busy day. Hey, listen, I believe in the work she does. I know the impact of your journey, Molly. What more can I do? Now it's easy. The answer is yes, yes. And so those 3 questions asked repeatedly over time free us to live our best days today, even better than the day we lived yesterday or the day before.
In just a minute, we'll get back to the episode. But first, here's a free resource I want to share with you. How many of you are leaving money on the table because of costly negotiation mistakes? Getting the best possible outcome in a negotiation can be a challenge. Most people leave money on the table because they don't know how to navigate the conversation. We get it, and we're here to help. Go to 5negotiationmistakes.com to download our free PDF, 5 Negotiation Mistakes Costing You Money. In this free resource, you will learn how to avoid common mistakes. You discover things like how to identify and adapt to different style negotiators, how to maximize your deal points, how to ask with confidence. Once you read this PDF, you'll no longer feel frustrated and overwhelmed when it's time to negotiate. So here's all you need to do next. Download 5 Negotiation Mistakes Costing You Money. Check it out, read it, review it, and start negotiating like a pro. All you have to do is go to 5negotiationmistakes.com for the free download. That's 5 like the number 5, negotiationmistakes.com. Now back to the conversation. Tell me this, John. When did you learn to? When was the moment? Maybe there was a moment where, or a window of time in which you really said, "I'm going to own my story." Was it after your parents wrote that book, and then that sort of created a public story that now you have also leaned in and written an incredible book, On Fire? I encourage everybody to grab it. It's very cool and very powerful on the 7 choices to inspire a radically inspired life. When did you lean into your story and own it? And clearly now you stand on stages all over the world and tell the story.
All right. So it's a process I'm still learning. I still find myself sometimes with my hands in my pockets so that others don't see that I'm different. So when you hear the O'Leary story or you read On Fire, just recognize I got to take my own medicine. And I'm sometimes writing and speaking to the mirror. You just happen to be listening or reading. Okay, so I'm still trying to figure this one out. So welcome to my therapy session with Molly Fletcher. I'm on her couch right now. But to answer your question in short, even after my mom and dad wrote their book, it was a starting point. And then I read a little book about, or a little story about a girl who refused to wear her red jacket. And the red jacket symbolized like her story. And like for me, I was like, I wonder what my story is. I had no idea what it was. And then a group of 3 Girl Scouts in St. Louis, Missouri County invited Mr. O'Leary, that's me at age 26 or so, to share my story with her troop. And so my mother taught me the answer. The answer is yes. Even if you don't want to go, the answer is yes. And so I went. I was so nervous before speaking to those girls. I got sick in the parking lot. Like that's how... Like, these are 3 third graders, man. You can't even step up for this one. And the answer was no. But I said yes, so I went. I stood in front of those little monsters. I read my notes. I never looked up from those notes. And rather than telling them about my story, I told them about the story of the guy named Abraham Lincoln and all that he went through. And so even after they invited me to share my story, and even after my mom and dad's book came out, I still wasn't able to talk about my story yet. So it took a while to embrace the reflection in the mirror. I had a little boy named Jack who was 3 years old. And he was tracing one day when I was shaving with my shirt off, one of my scars in my stomach. And he's like tracing it up and down with his cute little pointer finger. And then he says to me in a voice I'll never forget, "Daddy, your tummy is red, it is bumpy, and it is ridgy. And I'm like, oh, I guess I'm about to tell him that I got burned. And then he goes, and Daddy, I love it. I just love it, Daddy. And so I've had these little snowflakes of events, my mom and dad's book, reading this article about a red jacket, speaking in front of Girl Scouts, my own son's love, my wife taking my hand and just saying, it doesn't matter to me what it feels like. I love it. I savor it. That has eventually led to a guy who lacked confidence for a long time to have enough to eventually begin to embrace the story. And once you begin that movement, it's like a snowball rolling downhill. It's a cool, tough thing to stop. And so today I have the honor of traveling the world sharing the story, but it's one I'm still trying to figure out a little bit.
No question. I think certainly we all are. And one of the things I've heard you talk about is how important it is, and clearly you live this and do this, to share tough stuff. The world we live in is, kids take 15 pictures of themselves and post the best one. And,
Right.
We have this Facebook thing where people post all these amazing moments. You don't see many posts that aren't amazing out there. And so, but I agree with you. I think these moments that aren't perfect are so important to share because it drives connection with other people. And it helps them learn from our own mistakes and our
Yes.
own circumstances. Tell me about your sort of thoughts on that. Clearly you live it, but how would you encourage other people to share the real stuff so that it drives, in my opinion, connection?
So there's a guy I read named Henry Nouwen, and Henry Nouwen's probably passed away 15 years ago or so, but he wrote a book called The Wounded Healer. And in that book, I think he wrote, and this could be totally off. So if it's off, just say, this is John O'Leary's quote. I'll take credit for it now, but I believe it's Henry Nouwen. Nouwen says, what is most intimate and personal is most universal, which means the things in your marriage or your singleness or your fears or your darkness, the things that you're like, oh, this is most personal to me. If you have the audacity to whisper to a friend or someone else struggling or someone else draining, they frequently will look at you and then say, oh, Molly, you too?
Right.
Like I'd always thought you had it all together. You're 3 teenage girls and your business and you're speaking and you're writing, you got a podcast. You're broken too. I had no idea. And so I lead with brokenness. And I got a wonderful family and a wonderful life, but I'm unafraid of going into the shadows and reminding people how far from easy or perfect my life is. And I don't do it on Facebook as frequently, but one-to-one in a coffee shop, I'm in. Like
Right.
you're going to hear about it. When there's the intimacy of a self-help type group or in a stadium full of people, I lead with the stuff that is most intimate, most personal. And then what happens always afterwards is people line up and one by one, they shake what remains in my hand and they say to me, John, my story's different, but here's mine. And then they go on and share about their divorce, their challenges, whatever's going on in their own journey. So I believe that's actually the theme and the thread that connects us together in the human family.
Yeah, for sure. And John, when you speak, and I've had the pleasure of speaking before with you, and I've heard your message, but for our listeners, what is the message that people walk away from? That how would you say it when you're done speaking?
There's several. One would be, broadly speaking, if he can do it, what can I do in my own life?
Sure.
But I think that's kind of like the easy cherry on the top. I think a deeper message is, practically speaking, how do you live this in your day in and day out life? I think that's a critical message to understand, unpack, and get right. So how do you tactically live this daily? That's hard for all of us. A third message would be the sanctity of my life. And I don't mean John O'Leary's, I mean Molly Fletcher's. And I mean every single one of your thousands of listeners right now. We cheapen to a great degree our own lives. And if we're doing that ourselves, if we're doing that as we look at our wrinkles and our pimples and our dimples and our scars and our graying hair and our expanding tummy line, how are we then going to treat the barista and the janitor and the kindergarten, just that kindergarten teacher or just the print? Like, what I would say to all of us is there are no just anything. Like, your life is sacred. It matters. I do not believe you're here by accident. I think you're here on purpose. And it's up to us to figure out what that causes. And in the meantime, to treat one another with profound respect. And in doing so, they will see within your own face what they seldom see in line as a barista. Like they will see someone else looking back at them, sincerely grateful for the way they handed the coffee over to you in the morning, or for the way they sweep the floors in the hospital, or for the way they greet you at the restaurant. And the more we can respect one another, I think the more together we can begin solving some of the big ills that we face as society today. But it won't happen until we recognize the beauty of each individual life.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you never know what that sort of fun, kind, loving, grateful, joyful comment means to the person at the checkout counter at Publix or the barista at Starbucks, right? In that moment, you may have changed their day, their week in a way that you don't even realize at the moment that you did, but you infused great energy into their lives. It's awesome. And you do that from the stage, I know, consistently, which is cool.
Well, I'm only able to do it because I received it. And for me, every morning of my life as a burn patient, Molly, the doctor would come in, but before he even said a word to me, he would bring in the janitor. He would sit the janitor down next to my bed, and he would say, Lavelle, look at this patient. You are keeping little John alive. That's the work that you do today, Lavelle. And then he would bring in the PT and remind the PT, Brenda, of the work she does. And then the OT, a woman named Julie. And one by one, I saw modeled in front of me as a little boy the value of ordinary work. And what it reminded me, and what I hope it inspires the rest of us, is like, there is not ordinary work. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote an awful lot about race relations. But almost to the same degree, he wrote about the sanctity of work, like the dignity of street sweeping, like it matters. Mm-hmm. And so for all of your listeners, whether it's a high-end coach, a high-end ball player, or just someone running kids around, I would remind you, like, your work matters big time. Act like it.
Yeah. Well, and I've heard you talk about the janitor, and it's just so cool because you talk about how keeping hospitals clean clearly is an incredibly important job. And that's what he did. And it's funny that you tell that story. It reminds me of Tom Izzo, one of my coaches, made sure he had a national championship ring for the janitor of Breslin Center, where the guys play, because he knew that he had so much to do with them winning a national championship. And a lot of coaches don't go that deep, and it was cool when Tom told me that story.
We're sharing the exact same story. You know what I mean? Whether it's burn care or a national title or college basketball, the just jobs, and finger quotes, they're not.
Yeah.
They're as important as the head recruiter, the head coach, the ninth guy off the bench. Like, hey, if that kid doesn't show up in practice on a Tuesday when he's tired, the other five aren't going to get it right either. Yeah. And so every individual life, whether it's for a title-run team or in a hospital or in any other career that you choose, it really does matter.
John, we end with rapid fire, so I'm going to fire off some questions to you, and you just tell me what comes up. Does that sound good?
I'm nervous. Let me grab a drink real quick.
Stop.
There's going to be a stiff one. Hold on. It's going to let me squeeze the lime. All right. I'm ready now.
All right. So one word to describe yourself.
Blessed. And I'm going to use two. And lucky. Blessed, lucky, and loving.
And a book you've read that's impacted you.
The Return of the Prodigal Son.
Why?
You know, so it's a spiritual book, but it's about a kid that ran away and did everything wrong imaginable, and for a kid who burnt down his dad's house. And we can laugh about it today, but there's nothing funny about it. And for all the harm that it caused, so many others might journey forward by accident many times, but maybe even on purpose without knowing it. I see this story as an invitation to come home, which is awesome. But I also see the calling to become like the Father, which is this grand example of forgiveness and longing joy that welcomes people home. And I think in a marketplace that is so focused on despair and struggle and success in the non-life-giving way, like what's in it for me, man? We see in this example of a father what real significance and success looks like. And I hope my kids get it from their daddy. I hope my wife gets it from her husband. And then when I speak or write, I hope my followers get it from me.
Yeah. Well, they do. One thing on your bucket list.
You know, this is so lame. Like, I travel the world as a speaker. So, like, people say, what's your favorite place to go? And it's like, man, I love landing in Lambert Airport, St. Louis, as lame as that is. And The thing on the bucket list is when my sons eulogize their daddy someday, whether that's in 3 months or 46 years, that they brag far less about the books that he wrote or the impact that he had broadly, and much more about how he was as a husband to their mom and to a dad. And I get emotional thinking about it, but that's all I care about. I want to serve them and love them and be a faithful steward.
Mm-hmm. You know, for somebody like you that influences so many people, but to stay centered and rooted in the people that love you the most likely, and the people you love the most in your home, is really cool. So a message you would want to tell your younger self. How about that?
When you say younger, am I looking at myself at age 9, 19, 29, or 39?
Why don't we do 9 and then let's do 18?
All right. So at age 9, I would tell that put yourself back in the shoes of a child who has no fingers, has none of his own skin yet on his body, just it hasn't grown in yet, and is tied down to a hospital bed. I would remind that little boy what Jack Buck was trying to say to him, which was, kid, wake up. Mm. You are going to live. You are going to abundantly live. And the best is in front of you. Mm. Fight on, have faith, and you got this, and you're not alone. And I would hope that your listeners hear that not only for the 9-year-old, but also for each of them. Mm-hmm. So that's what I would tell my 9-year-old self, and sometimes what I would tell my 42-year-old self, like, it's okay, fight on, and the best is in front of you. Mm. What I would tell my 19-year-old self is to knock off the act. You don't need to be anybody other than you. Everybody else has already kind of spoken for and taken. So authentically embrace the shadows, the weaknesses, the scars, the wounds that you have. And those friends who are going to love you for it are going to step forward, and those friends who are going to be repulsed by it will step away. And both ways you win. Yeah. And I think my greatest concern as a 19-year-old boy was, will anyone ever love this little boy, this young man? And I would remind that 19-year-old boy that she is more stunning than he can fathom, that it won't be easy to get there, but this brunette with brown eyes and a gorgeous face and an even brighter, more brilliant heart is going to step forward in about 4 years. And just be patient, because she's right around the corner.
So the show's called Game Changers with Molly Fletcher. So one last question for you. What game changer inspires you and why?
Wow. So I will take 2. I hate answering your questions in a
That's
in a
all right. Hey,
fashion,
no, you've carved your own path, your own in your story. Go for it.
Not long ago, we celebrated Mother's Day, and I shared 2 examples from my mother that remind me and hopefully your listeners why she's my hero. And I've shared very little about my dad, but here's a man who he's a veteran, he's a business owner, he's got 6 kids, he's busy. And the way he showed up in my life the day I was burned, he is the prodigal father. Like, he is the one that just greeted me with this intense sense of love that shaped what happened next in my recovery and in my life. And I'll never forget that. But in addition to the way he responded that day, this is the guy that has been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease now for 27 years. This is a man who can no longer earn, can no longer drive, can no longer walk, and really can no longer speak. And this is a guy who on Saturday morning last week, picked him up. We went to the Cracker Barrel, pushed him around with my kids. He doesn't say much. He doesn't move much. And yet he has this goofy grin on his face perpetually. And you look around the Cracker Barrel or any other barrel that you may find yourself in today, and the majority of the world are looking down or frowning or grimacing in the monotony of the day. And then you have this man who is exhibit A of what joy looks like embodied. And it is not an easy life. And it is not one that he would have chosen, but it is one that he has accepted, surrendered to, embraced, and is showing the rest of us what real success looks like. Mm. So, yes, I just respect my mom and dad. They are who I hope I become when I finally grow up and stop being a kid and start being a guy, start being a leader and a man in life.
Wow, you're very, very humble, which I so admire. And you are an incredible man, and you are someone so many people admire. So, John O'Leary, I tell you what, you're amazing. And I hope our listeners learn a little bit more about how to overcome adversity, how to own their story, how to lean into vulnerability, how to embrace moments and the gifts in them, and to lean into life, to say yes to life. So, John, thank you so much.
And in life, that's not necessarily a positive. It's both yes and. It's the negative and the beauty together. And in saying yes to that, I believe we ensure our best days are not only tomorrow, but starting right now.
Thank you, John, for coming on.
Molly Fletcher, you're the best.
Thanks, as always, for listening to Game Changers with Molly Fletcher. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts. There you can listen to previous episodes and leave us a review, which helps other people find out about the show. For more about me, visit mollyfletcher.com. Until next time, stay curious and be bold.